What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, and today we are going to be discussing the case of Louise Josephine Massett. And while this is a reboot, I do want to say that this video has been up for 6 months, and it's gotten something like 65 or 67 views. So most of you won't even know it's a reboot. Plus, I haven't done one of these in like 3 weeks. I've been trying to put out all new content, and I have so much coming up. As I always say, I've been working so hard. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Did Louise Massett murder her own son? Or was she wrongfully convicted? Louise Josephine Massett was born on June 15, 1863 in Russell Square in London, and that makes her a Gemini. Her father was named Etienne Massett, and he was of French descent, and her mother Elizabeth was of English descent. Louise was the middle child of 3 daughters, and while her parents weren't by any means to be considered wealthy, they were able to provide a comfortable and good lifestyle for their family. She was also considered very attractive, and because of the comfortable upbringing, she was able to have her official education right there in London, but she also spent some time in France learning abroad as well. She was a smart and cultured young woman. In 1895, at the age of 32 years old, Louise found out she was pregnant, and in May of 1896, she gave birth to a baby boy whom she named Manfred. The child was illegitimate, and in the late 19th century, having a child out of wedlock would have put a huge stigma on not just Louise, but on her child as well. He would have been considered a bastard. Because of this, Louise moved away and went to live with her sister Leonia and her brother-in-law Richard. Louise's sister and brother-in-law didn't charge her anything to stay with them, but she was still solely financially responsible for little Manfred. So she decided to answer an ad in the paper for a daytime governess, and this made her put little Manfred in someone else's care, because when you're a governess, you do tend to live with the people. I assume that because, as I just said, she practically had to live with the family in order to be governess. She had to be there all day long. She really couldn't take care of little Manfred during the day. I don't know why she sent this child to live with somebody else, to live with Helen Gentle. And I also don't know why her sister and brother-in-law weren't able to keep Manfred during the day while Louise worked. I don't know, but I know Helen Gentle took over the sole care of little Manfred temporarily while Louise worked for this wealthy family as their governess. While Louise wasn't governing these children during the day, she was also a very accomplished piano player, and she gave lessons to kind of supplement her income. Miss Gentle charged Louise 37 shillings per month to care for little Manfred, and Louise claimed that Manfred's father was the one paying the money for his son's care. This is what she told everybody else. She visited her son every Wednesday and usually took him to the park, where not only he could spend time with his mom, but also where he could play with other children. In 1898, a young Frenchman named Lucas, who was just 19 years old at the time, moved in right next door to where Louise was staying with her sister. He had come to England to work as a bank clerk, and while Louise was 35 years old and Lucas was only 19, it didn't matter. They still started this romantic relationship together. In May of 1899, Louise, Lucas, and 2 of Lucas's friends went to Brighton for an entire weekend, kind of for a little mini vacation, where they stayed at a place called Finley's Guest House. Louise and Lucas talked about how great it was going to be when they finally went back there sometime, just the 2 of them. Eventually, Louise felt she needed to tell Lucas about her son, and when she did, she was very surprised, happily surprised, because he assured her that it wasn't an issue with him, and it made no difference if she had an illegitimate son or if she had a child. He would accept both her and her son and help her to support herself and her son, and it made no difference in their relationship and didn't change anything about the way he felt about her. This must have been music to her ears, because this was a rare find, a man who felt this way about an unmarried mother back in the day. It wasn't even like she was a widow. On October 16, 1899, after 3 whole years of caring for little Manfred, Helen Gentle received a letter from Louise stating that Manfred's father, who lived in France, wanted full custody of the boy to take him to live with him in France, and also for Manfred to be educated there. This was a huge deal. Being educated in a foreign country, especially one like France, gave you so much more of an advantage, not just culturally, but like in life, that it was a huge deal for Manfred to be able to go and do this. Because of this, Louise also wrote in the letter to Helen that she believed it was in Manfred's best interest, and Helen actually agreed. As sad as she was to see the little boy go, who had become more like her son than Louise is, she agreed that it was the best thing for him. It would be the opportunity to give him a better and the best life. 8 days later, on October 24th, Louise met Lucas at the train station on Liverpool Street, and she informed him that she was going to be traveling to Brighton the following Friday, and Lucas did agree to meet her there, but he said he wasn't going to be able to be there until the next day, Saturday the 28th, one day after Louise was supposed to leave to go there. So she'd be getting there a day earlier, essentially. They decided to make 2 reservations at Finley's Hotel and say that they were brother and sister. I assume this was because of the reputation thing, she being a woman, he being a man, and them not being married. I guess they didn't want to play the husband and wife role. So this is kind of what you had to do back then. You couldn't just be renting hotel rooms with random men or men that weren't your husband. I mean, imagine the scandal, an unmarried couple with a woman much older than the man checking into hotel room together. On October 25th, Louise went to Miss Gentle's and picked up her son. Keep in mind, Miss Gentle had cared for Manfred, as I said, for 3 whole years now, and she really, really loved this little boy. She described him as energetic and cheerful, and she was crying and kind of a mess. She was going to miss him so much. She was making a fuss over him, you know, her little darling. And Louise reassured Miss Gentle that the move to France was the best thing for Manfred. It was in his best interest. And so they agreed to meet outside the Birdcage Public House in Stanford Hill at 12:45 p.m. on Friday, October 27th to exchange the child. So she went to meet them. She spent some time with Manfred. She spoke in person to Miss Gentle about what was going to be happening next. When Friday the 27th rolled around, the 2 women met at the designated location, and Louise took custody of her son as agreed. She ordered a horse-drawn omnibus to take her to the train station, where she had told Miss Gentle she was taking the train to New Haven and then the ferry to France. Keep in mind that Louise was also supposed to be meeting Lucas at the London Street station, and it wasn't possible for her to be in 2 places at the same time, but we know that she did pick up Manfred. She and Manfred headed to the station, and she arrived at about 1:40 p.m., and the 2 made their way into the waiting area. While there, Louise struck up a conversation with a woman named Georgina Warley. Louise told her she was just meeting someone there, and at about 2:40 p.m., so at about an hour later, another attendant named Ellen Reese saw Louise and Manfred still in the station's waiting room, but Manfred at this point was tired of standing around waiting. He was crying. He was kind of bored and having a little bit of a temper tantrum, as young boys do, 3-year-old boys do, right? Ellen approached and asked Louise what was wrong with him, and Louise responded that he was just missing his nurse. And in order to cheer the toddler up, Louise took him for a walk to buy him a cake, and by the time they got to the bake shop, it was 3 p.m. At around 6:19 p.m. on that same day, Friday, October 27th, 1899, 2 women at the train station at Dorson Junction in North London, which was about 4 miles away from London Bridge Station, where Louise and Manfred had been just waiting a few hours before, were there to attend a lecture. Their names were Mary Tiern and Margaret Briggs. So why they were all the way 4 miles away across town at this other station now, nobody knows. It's never been anything really that's been explained, and this is kind of a confusing case, so try to follow along. Right before the 2 women left the station, Miss Tiern needed to use the restroom, so she went to the station's bathroom to do so. The bathroom was really, really dark, and it only had 2 stalls, and when she walked in and tried to open the first stall, something was blocking it. She tried to look to see what was preventing her from opening the door, and she thought she saw a child's face just like kind of there in the dark, and she was kind of in shock and a little bit terrified too. So she ran out of the bathroom to go and get her traveling companion, Miss Briggs, and have her come in to see if she was really seeing what she thought she was seeing. And Briggs decided to accompany her, but she wanted to go and get a porter to come and just help them open the door. She thought that Tiern was being a little bit hysterical. Maybe she had been tired of waiting too and was just getting tired. So they went and they got the porter. And as the porter walked into the bathroom, he took the small amount of light from his oil lamp and kind of went underneath the stall with the lamp to look and see what was there. He did, in fact, and so did the women because they were peering too, discover the body of a small child who was lying on the floor covered by a black shawl, and next to him was a bloody brick. It was a male child, and obviously they ran out of there like bats out of hell and called the authorities. At 6:55 p.m., the police arrived and they called the doctor, who came and did his examination right there in the bathroom stall. He said that, in his opinion, the child had died right around 2 hours from then, so around 4:55. After this cursory examination in the bathroom stall, the child was taken away and sent to autopsy. The pathologist confirmed that the time of death was between 2:55 p.m. and 5:55 p.m., with the most likely time of death being between 3:55 p.m. and 4:55 p.m. The cause of death was suffocation, and the police's first order of duty was to try and identify the child, as there were no missing children reports in that area at the time, and also obviously there was no identification on the child. Back in these days, the next phase of standard operating procedure to try and identify a body was to put a description of the deceased, the unidentified deceased, out into the newspaper. And on Monday, October 30th, Miss Helen Gentle must have seen the newspaper description, because she showed up at the police station and told them that from the description that she had seen, she had thought that she knew who the boy was, and she thought it to be little Manfred, whom she had cared for solely and by herself for 3 whole years, and who she had just passed off to his mother so that he can go and live and get educated in France. She gave the police the entire story of what Louise had told her in the letter, what Louise had told her in person, passing the child off, and everything that had happened pretty much from when she took custody of Manfred 3 years earlier. Poor Miss Gentle. I mean, who worse to have to identify little Manfred's body? But that's exactly what she had to do, and she was absolutely devastated. Like, she fainted at least once. She could barely hold herself up. She was shaking, crying. I mean, it would be like having to identify the body of your 3-year-old son. Unimaginable pain. After telling the detectives the entire story of what had transpired between she and Louise from the time that she took Manfred on until the time that she dropped him back off and met Louise, she gave them the address of where Louise was living with her sister and brother-in-law. A detective did go to Louise's sister's house, but unfortunately, when he first arrived, Louise was out giving a piano lesson. And when he spoke to her sister, she said that she and Louise had discussed the exact same thing that Louise had discussed with Miss Gentle, that the boy's biological father, whom nobody knew who he was, had written to Louise and said that he wanted to take custody of the child to bring him to France. She also told the detective that Louise had not returned home from picking up little Manfred on October 27th until 2 days later on Sunday, October 29th. Now, we know she was going to be meeting Lucas in Brighton also that weekend. So she was supposed to be there Friday. He was showing up Saturday. But she was also supposed to be taking Manfred to France on Friday as well. So as far as how she was behaving when she came home from her trip, her sister said she was behaving perfectly normally. She was typical, regular old Louise. Not as though she had murdered her son or that any kind of tragedy or travesty had occurred. She was actually in really great spirits. The detective left the house after speaking to Louise's sister, but he left 2 plainclothes police officers, detectives, outside of the house to wait for Louise to come home to question her. And while these 2 plainclothes officers did not see Louise that night, they did see her brother-in-law Richard leaving in a big hurry with another man whom they did not know who it was. They crossed the street and hurriedly followed behind Richard and this unidentified man to see where they were going. Maybe they would lead them to Louise. The officers ended up following these 2 men to a house that was only a very short distance away, and they watched the 2 men go inside. They waited outside for a little while, but they got kind of tired of waiting and wanted to know what was going on. Like, what was Louise's brother-in-law doing in such a hurry, running out of there? Was he going to warn Louise? What was going on? So eventually they impatiently knocked on the door. When they went into the house, they realized that the other man was Louise's other brother-in-law, and the house was that of his and Louise's other sister. Louise was in fact there, and she was inconsolably upset. Louise's other brother-in-law was named George, and he had told the police that Louise had showed up at his house about an hour earlier in a, quote, very confused and anxious state, end quote, and that she had claimed to have gone to his house straight away after she had read the article in the paper about her son's deceased body being found at the train station. This is the first thing that's a little shady and suspicious to me, because if this was just a few blocks away from where she lived with her other sister and her brother-in-law Richard, why didn't she just go home? Okay, she was home and she left the house to go give a piano lesson, allegedly. And then she reads about her son being found deceased at the train station, right? So there was just a difference of a few blocks here. I don't know which house was closer to wherever she was given the piano lesson, but I mean, surely she could have walked the 2 or 3 extra blocks it would have taken to get home. Was she purposely trying to avoid or evade police? The police did leave that day. They left Louise. They gave her like 24 hours to kind of calm down, as long as she promised to be formally interviewed the next day, which she did. She did show up the next day as planned to be interviewed. And the story she told to the police was, in my opinion, quite bizarre. Let me know what you think in the comments below, as always. Louise told the investigators that on Wednesday, October 4th, 1899, she was at the park with her son Manfred for one of her regular Wednesday visits. Remember, she would pick him up from Miss Gentle, bring him to the park to spend time with him for the week, and let him play with the other children there. She claims that on this day it was different, though, because she ran into 2 very sweet, very friendly older women who told her they ran a small private school in Chelsea that they thought would be perfect for little Manfred, because as he was getting a little bit older, he was getting ready to start school soon and he would need to be starting his education. According to Louise, the women told her that they chose Manfred because he seemed, quote, smart and polite, end quote, and that they thought he would be the perfect addition to their little school. Louise said that she had always felt very guilty for her son being illegitimate and also for not being able to raise him. So when this opportunity arose, she said that all she ever wanted was for the best for her son, everything in the best interest of Manfred. And she knew that this would be in his best interest. She said she had so much guilt. He hadn't had a very good start in life because of her poor choices, or what she considered poor choices, as, again, him being illegitimate, and circumstances that were out of Manfred's control. But people would take it out on him for the rest of his life if she didn't do her best to get him at least a very good education so he can go on and do great things. After all, he was a boy. She also stated she knew the value of a good education, and again, just wanting the best for her son, she considered this. She thought that sending him to this fancy school in Chelsea would be the perfect opportunity for her to make up for a lot of the wrong that she had already done the little boy in her own mind. She already wasn't raising him, Helen Gentle was, so why not let him be getting educated, a really good education, while she wasn't raising him anyway? So eventually, Louise did agree to send Manfred to the school in Chelsea. The older of the 2 women, named Mrs. Browning, informed Louise that the fee was £12 a year for the housing and £10 a month for the education, but they assured her it was well worth it, and they arranged to meet again the next Wednesday in the same park for Louise to give her answer, which, as I said, the answer was yes. Also at this meeting a week later, they made arrangements to meet again for the exchange, and also they offered Louise the opportunity to come for the day and see the school in Chelsea where Manfred would be staying, and they were supposed to meet on Friday, October 27th, when they would all go together to Chelsea to visit the school, and also this is when Louise was to pay the women the first fee. Louise claimed that the reason she had lied to Miss Gentle about Manfred going to France to get this great education from his biological father was because she didn't want to hurt the old woman's feelings and say, oh, I'm going to send him to these other 2 old women, and, you know, because he's going to get a better education and have a better life there, you know, instead of just being honest and knowing that Miss Gentle, who loved Manfred very much, probably would have been happy that the little boy was going to go and be educated. Perhaps she may have wanted to see the school or meet the headmistresses here. So she did it out of guilt and out of trying to protect the elderly woman, Miss Gentle's feelings. Allegedly, according to Louise anyway. Is she just trying to make herself sound better? I don't know. She didn't want to tell Miss Gentle that these two other women could give him a better education and a better chance at a better life than Miss Gentle could, all Miss Gentle had done for her. And I guess I can kind of understand that if it's true. I know that lying kind of never gets you anywhere. I've learned that the hard way, but it's what Louise did, and this was her story. On October 27th, when it came time for Louise and Manfred to meet the two women and visit the school in Chelsea, they had arrived 2 hours late, and therefore there was no time for Louise to go and visit the school that day and get back to catch the train to Brighton, where she had fully intended to go because she had loved it so much there, and also she was meeting Lucas the next day. Louise stated that she gave the two women the first payment, Manfred himself, and all of his belongings. Louise stated that she asked for a receipt, and Mrs. Browning had gone off to go and find a pen and paper because she wasn't prepared to give a receipt. And once again, Mrs. Browning took so much time in returning, Louise was forced to leave, or else she would have missed her 4:07 train to Brighton. I wonder if Louise had mentioned, like, from the door about her trip to Brighton, like maybe just talking, having conversations. Con artists, if that's what these elderly women were, if these elderly women actually existed, let's say for a minute that this story is the truth, that Louise is telling the truth. Con artists like this will try to really get a lot of information out of you, and before you know it, you're telling them things that you don't even realize you're telling them. So I'm wondering if Louise somehow let it out that she was going to Brighton that weekend and let out the time she was going to the train, that she had to catch the train, so that they were purposely late. They purposely didn't have a pen and paper for the receipt because they didn't want to leave any evidence that they actually existed, so Louise can prove that she handed Manfred off. And they knew this and purposefully did all of this because they knew Louise would not want to miss her train to Brighton, and they knew they wouldn't have to give a receipt for the money, and also they wouldn't have to go and bring her to this school, which most likely, if this story is true, did not exist. Louise said that she hugged her son goodbye, gave him a kiss, told him to be a good boy and that she would see him soon, and then she went and boarded her train. Right from the minute she was finished telling her story, or perhaps the minute she started telling this story, the police thought that Louise was guilty. They arrested her right there on the spot and charged her with murder. In the beginning of the investigation, the police spoke to the two women attendants that Louise had spoken to and had conversations with on the day of the murder. Their names were Miss Georgina Worley and Miss Ellen Reese. Ellen Reese told the police that she had seen Louise in the ladies' bathroom where Manfred's body was eventually found at 6:55 p.m. that same night, but that Louise was alone and Manfred was nowhere in sight. Again, if this is true, was Louise really alone, or was Manfred just nowhere in sight? Did Miss Reese check the stalls and see if Manfred was there? I mean, there are so many more questions. Miss Reese alleged that at this time, Louise had asked her what time the next train to Brighton left the station. So obviously, if this was the case and this actually happened, Louise did not catch her 4:07 p.m. train to Brighton if she was in this restroom at 6:55 p.m. on the same night asking when the next train left. Ellen Reese also stated that she saw Louise 20 minutes after the first bathroom encounter, so at around 7:15 p.m., standing on the platform and waiting for the next train to Brighton. Police set up a lineup to make sure that Ellen Reese was correctly identifying Louise, so she did pick Louise out immediately and without hesitation of this 6-person lineup. The police then visited Finley's Hotel, which is where Louise had stayed that weekend in Brighton. Louise had earlier told the police that she had arrived at the hotel somewhere in the early evening, but the hotel's owner, John Finley, and a maid named Alice Reel told police that Louise actually had not checked in until around 9:45 that night, and she checked in under an assumed name, which was Miss Brooks. On October 28th, the day after Manfred's body was found in the restroom at the train station, a brown paper parcel had been found in the same ladies' room where Manfred was found. It was taken to the lost and found, but it was never claimed. Miss Gentle ended up confirming that this jacket and these boys' clothes were the ones that she sent along with Manfred when she sent him with Louise that day, and they were in the same brown parcel that she had sent them along in. Now the police were trying to trace this black shawl, and eventually they did. They traced it back to a store, which was right near, very, very close to where Louise was living with her sister and brother-in-law, Richard. The saleswoman in the store confirmed to the investigators that she had sold that exact black shawl to a woman matching Louise's description. This saleswoman also picked Louise out of a lineup, but she said she wasn't 100% sure that it was in fact Louise that she had sold the shawl to, but she was like 95, 96% sure. So she was pretty sure that it was Louise, but she didn't want to say 100% guaranteed in case she was wrong. It's important to note at this point that Louise's trial had gained national attention from the media, and because of this, Louise's defense attorneys theorized that the witnesses who had picked her out of a lineup could very well have seen her picture in one of the dozens and dozens of newspapers, and therefore they were most likely confused, thinking they had seen her somewhere she wasn't, because her picture was ingrained into their heads because of all of the constant media coverage surrounding this case. Everything I've said so far is all the evidence the police had that Louise did this. So no evidence at all. A shawl that she may or may not have bought were found with the child. That's pretty much their evidence. On December 13th, 1899, the trial of Louise Josephine Massett for the murder of her son, Manfred Massett, started at the courthouse in London. The prosecution told the court that Louise's relationship with Lucas was the motive for the murder. They theorized that maybe she thought the child would eventually become a barrier to their relationship, but both Louise and Lucas denied this because, as I had mentioned earlier, Lucas said that he didn't care that she had a kid. It wasn't going to come between them. He welcomed her and her son. He was willing to help her support herself and her son. So this doesn't make any sense. Her son was already living with someone else. So even if Lucas did have a problem with Manfred, which he did not, then he wouldn't have been a problem because he didn't live with Louise. And this wasn't just Louise saying this either. Lucas testified to this, that, he loved Louise and in turn would love her son regardless if he was illegitimate or not. It didn't matter. Lucas was a really good guy, and he was a rare gem for back in the day because you were damaged goods and used property and kind of a throwaway once something like this happened to you. Because of course, it's always the woman's fault. Less talky, more sandwich. Once Lucas testified that, in fact, he was willing to love Manfred as his own, and once Louise's defense attorneys pointed out that what I just said, Manfred didn't even live with Louise, so how could this possibly be the case? The prosecution changed their theory, and now they were saying that Louise just didn't want to have to pay Miss Gentle the money anymore that she was paying for her to care for Manfred. Louise not only denied this, she said she worked so hard because she took pride in being able to pay for and at least care for her son financially, but she also vehemently denied being the woman that the sales lady saw purchasing the black shawl that was found covering Manfred's deceased body. It wasn't her, she said. She did not own that shawl, and it wasn't her. When being questioned in court, and she did testify, the prosecution asked Louise why she would just randomly hand her son over to two strange women simply because they claimed to be running a boarding school. The prosecution then went on to inform her that had she done her due diligence as a mother and actually checked out the address in Chelsea that she was given by Miss Browning and the other woman, she would have figured out that there not only was no boarding school there, but there was nobody by the name of Browning there either. She was being conned, swindled, duped. The prosecution said the autopsy gave the probable time of death as 4:30 p.m. As I'm sure you can see, the prosecution's evidence completely contradicts previous evidence, especially their witnesses regarding who saw Louise where and at what time. So basically, they're putting her, in the bathroom at 4:30 p.m. when they're saying that Manfred passed away, that's when he was murdered, right? But Miss Ellen Reese said that she saw her in there at 6:45 p.m. So what, she murdered him at 4:30 in the bathroom and then hung around for another few hours? It just doesn't make sense. Louise testified that after getting to Brighton a bit before 7 p.m., she had visited a restaurant and then some shops before checking into the hotel, and that was why the attendant and owner testified she hadn't checked in until around 9:45 p.m. because while she arrived in Brighton a bit before 7, as she stated, she neglected to mention that she had shopped around a little bit, went and got something to eat, and then checked into the hotel at around 9:45. At this point, the trial of Louise Massett was getting massive media attention, and because of this, a waiter came forward who worked at the restaurant that Louise claimed to have eaten at immediately after she stepped off the train in Brighton a little bit before 7 p.m. If this witness is to be believed, then Louise wasn't lying about getting something to eat before checking into the Finley Hotel. The waiter, who doesn't seem to have a name, and the owner of the establishment as well, both said that because of the weather that day, they had only served 2 customers and Louise was one of them. And because of this, they were absolutely certain about their testimony. They were even able to accurately describe what she was wearing, how long she was there for, which was approximately, according to them, 45 minutes. So here's 2 people, one of them a business owner, who stated that Louise was in fact in this restaurant in Brighton a little bit before 7, eating in a restaurant as she had earlier testified. So it basically backs her up and gives her an alibi. It alibis her. What drives me absolutely nuts is that for some reason, the defense never bothered to call these 2 people. The jury was never able to hear this testimony which alibied her. This drives me absolutely nuts because the defense attorneys, Louise's defense, didn't ever call these 2 witnesses who could have totally verified her story and backed up her alibi. They never called them to the stand. And they also never bothered to verify the information that these 2 were giving. This means that the 2 eyewitnesses that put Louise exactly where she says she was, exactly at the time she said she was there on the day of her son's murder, were never even mentioned in court during her trial. Another witness who had come forward stated that she saw 2 women with a small boy near the restrooms at London Bridge Station on the day in question, and this woman was also never investigated further or called to testify in court for the defense. So here's 2 witnesses, as I said, who can verify Louise's alibi, and another eyewitness who saw these 2 women with a little boy matching Manford's description, and the 2 women matched the description of the 2 boarding school old ladies who nobody got to hear about in court. The public heard about it, people heard about it, sure, but it wasn't testimony, it wasn't sworn to in court. The people who needed to hear it, the jury, the judge, never got to hear it. Not officially, anyways. On top of that, there was also a man named John Ellis who was traveling on a bus that made a stop at London Bridge Station who saw 2 women matching the description of the boarding school ladies with a little child matching Manford's description. And Ellis stated that the 2 women and the young boy had sat opposite of him on the bus, and the boy seemed to not want to be with the 2 women. His time frame was off. It didn't really mesh with Louise's story because he stated this happened at around 3 p.m., but he also stated it very well could have been later, but he wasn't sure of the time, but he knew what he had seen. But still, it seems to me that this is something that should have been worth, definitely to the defense, especially looking more into. There were so many people who either saw these women with Manford or saw Louise right where she said she was. And nobody bothered to pursue it. John Ellis wasn't called in to testify either. On December 18th, 1899, Louise Josephine Massett was convicted and found guilty of the murder of her son, Manford Massett. The judge sentenced her to death, and she was immediately taken directly from court to Newgate Prison, where she was housed in a condemned cell. Only after she was sentenced and imprisoned did the defense finally decide to start looking further into the statements made by the waiter and the owner of the restaurant in Brighton that Louise claimed she had dined at that night. They asked Louise what she had eaten that night, and she gave 2 different answers, and neither of the answers matched what the waiter and the owner of the restaurant had said, and neither of her answers matched what were on the receipts. So therefore, they decided to not pursue or investigate any further and accept her conviction and no longer fight for her. On January 9th, 1900, Louise was hanged at Newgate Prison. Her legacy is being the first woman to be hanged in Britain in the 20th century. That's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. As I said in the beginning, only 67 people watched this one when I posted it 5 or 6 months ago. I don't know why. It's really interesting. I know there's not a ton of information, but I don't do like these super duper deep dives into the old time cases. They're supposed to be kind of, a little bit less info. They happened so long ago. A lot of information is lost throughout history. I really hope you did enjoy it though. Let me know what you think in the comments. I have my suspicions both ways, but I do lean a lot more towards Louise being innocent. I think she was very naive and plain old stupid to believe these women. I think that she was in such a rush to get to Lucas, who, was new love. It was exciting and fresh. She was so used to Manfred being with Miss Helen Gentle that she didn't think to check these women's stories. They looked like kindly old women. They were so friendly. They seemed so kind of educated and responsible. She just didn't think in her head. It wasn't like it is today where there's danger around every corner for our children. She just wasn't thinking. And I think because she was stupid, dumb, naive, and worried too much about her romantic relationship with Lucas, that she really effed up and handed her kid over to two murderesses. Why these women would do that, I don't know. I mean, if they needed the money that she gave them, because she did give them, I believe it was 22 shillings, they could have just taken the money and abandoned Manfred at the bus station, right? I mean, why did they have to murder the little boy? And he was savagely murdered as well. So please be sure and give this video a like. Again, guys, my views are in the hundreds and my likes are like 25, 35. I don't know, maybe you guys just don't like the videos. Is there something that I could be doing better? I'm working on the background. I don't get a lot of money. I get what I get from Patreon and that's it. And I have 6 patrons who, by the way, I love so, so much. Be sure, as usual, to subscribe if you aren't already. And again, hit that like button, share this video, spread the love. Help me get some more subscribers so I can make it to that 1,000. Doing big things, guys. Please be sure and check out the description box. You'll find links to be able to help support the channel financially to help me get things like a background and stuff that'll go right back into the videos to make better content for you all. There's a link to my Patreon and a link to my PayPal. Either way, there is more special content for Patreon and PayPal donors coming. I only have put up like one thing so far, and but also I do give early release every once in a while, or at least I try to, but there's a whole series coming for you guys regardless of how many I have. I appreciate you all. So think about signing up for Patreon for a monthly donation or PayPal for a one-time. Also, if you can't support the channel financially, that's totally fine, because I'm going to put some links down there too, some really entertaining ones of things that Steve Stockton and I are working on. You can listen to our podcast, which we are on hiatus from, Strange Things with Steve Stockton and Gemma Jade. You can listen to our Campfire Tales, where we interview every Friday, pretty much, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We interview someone from the paranormal community. There will be a link to that. You can listen to our fireside chat. Come sit fireside with us. There is not much content-based material in the fireside chats. A lot of people really, really despise fireside chats, and a lot of people really, really love it. Come on in, check it out for yourself. If it's not for you, that's fine. There's plenty of other things on the Missing Persons and Mysteries channel, but we do fireside chats every Sunday night from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and we get the people in the chat's opinion on what next, what do you guys want, what don't you want. We laugh, we have fun, we tell jokes. It's totally inclusive with the people in the chat. We totally recognize every single one of you. We listen to what you have to say. As I said, we joke, we just have a lot of fun. A link for one of those will be in the description box as well. And last, but definitely not least, Wednesday nights from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Steve Stockton and I do a series on Dezombified's channel called Real Evil. And we talk about real evil. We've done torture slayings. We've done child killers, mothers who kill, lady killers, celebrities who have killed their wives or the women in their lives. And that's a really great time too. We're fully interactive with the chat live there as well. If you can't check it out in the chat, check it out in perpetuity. I don't know, I wanted to use that word today. Click the links, guys. Check them out. Give them a thumbs up. Share them. Let us know what you think in the comments. And I really hope you enjoy everything that I've got going on. You know I love and appreciate all of you so much. Again, please consider donating even one time through PayPal. I could really use it, guys, and it does help tremendously. I do YouTube full time and I do not get paid all across the board. I do love it, so I'm going to keep on trucking and, you know, just getting myself out there and making a name for myself. And I know eventually the funds will start coming in. So as long as I work hard and stay focused, and I have the most amazing and supportive subscribers, even on Fireside Chat, it's like the best. You guys know you're like my family and I love you guys so much. So whatever you're doing, have your best day, have your best night, be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything and can make you feel so good and gain you so much. I will see you next time. Bye-bye, guys.